Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Caleb Ben David, coming to you live from Israel with the top headlines from out of this region and beyond. Well, it's 2 p.m. here in Tel Aviv. It's 7 a.m. in New York City. And here are the latest developments. The U.S. is signaling a major shift in its approach to Iran, halting diplomatic contacts while stepping up military and economic pressure. According to CNN, President Donald Trump has ordered his senior envoys to halt all negotiations with Iran, abandoning his recent push for a rapid diplomatic breakthrough. A source says the administration has shifted from trying to hammer Iran ASAP to seeking to strangle them over time through economic and military pressure. President Trump says there are no talks or conversations with Iran while the U.S. naval blockade remains in force. He also claims that the Strait of Hormuz is open and operating, and he posted a map on his Truth Social labeling it as new U.S. territory, though the map does not establish U.S. sovereignty over the area. Iran says the strait will remain closed until Washington lifts its blockade, eases sanctions, and ends military operations. Qatar says a deal to reopen the strait could help restore the ceasefire and bring Washington and Tehran back to the negotiating table. Meanwhile, the Nimitz-class aircraft carrier USS George Washington has sailed through the Strait of Malacca and is heading towards the region. U.S. military footage shows fighter jets launching and landing on the carrier. The carrier is expected to replace the USS Abraham Lincoln in a pre-planned rotation. The Washington Post also reports that the Pentagon is considering a broader redesign of the U.S. military footprint in the Mideast, possibly including moving some forces westward to Jordan or Israel. President Trump says the U.S. naval blockade of Iran remains in full force and that all mines have been removed or detonated. But Iranian negotiator Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf says the strait will remain closed until Washington meets Tehran's conditions, including lifting the blockade, easing oil sanctions, releasing frozen assets, and ending U.S. military operations. Well, Qatari officials say they are working to return the sides to the negotiating table, with reopening the Strait of Hormuz being the main objective.
The trajectory of events we would like to see in Qatar is an agreement on the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which would coincide with the resumption of the ceasefire and the resumption of the talks. Are these parallel lines, converging or diverging? It's not very systematic on our end, but what I would say is that the agreement over the Strait of Hormuz would make it much easier for us to resume the talks between the United States and Iran.
If you're just joining us, you are going to get all of this free stuff right here just for trying Earth Breeze. So,
in other security news, Israel has confirmed that it has carried out an unusual strike deep inside Syria, targeting the Abu al-Durher military airfield in Idlib province. Syrian and regional reports say 4 aircraft struck runways and storage facilities at the base, with no reports of casualties. The strike came after a Turkish military delegation reportedly visited the air base to examine plans to rehabilitate its runway. The IDF has not officially commented, but a senior Israeli official acknowledged to Fox News that Israel carried out the operation. The official said Israel had shared sensitive intelligence with Washington before the strike at the highest levels of the two governments. But the attack has drawn an unusually sharp rebuke from the U.S. Special Envoy for Syria Tom Barak said he was deeply concerned and called the strikes an unnecessary escalation that does not advance regional stability. Ambassador Barak said Washington believes restraint and diplomatic engagement are the more constructive path and urged all sides to prioritize dialogue. Turkey also strongly condemned the strike, while Syrian Foreign Minister Assad al-Shabani called it an unjustified provocation and a violation of Syria's sovereignty. While this strike comes as Turkey increasingly expands its role in post-war Syria, which Israel sees as a security threat, and as Washington pushes for greater stability and dialogue between Jerusalem and Damascus. And staying on Syria, the head of the UN nuclear watchdog says the International Atomic Energy Agency has found several tons of nuclear material at an undeclared site inside Syria. IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, speaking in Damascus, said the material could be put to, quote, bad use and will be placed under international safeguards. Syrian's Foreign Minister al-Shabani said Damascus voluntarily declared the material to the IAEA last month, saying it dates back to the legacy of the former Assad regime. Shabani says the material does not pose a risk and will remain under Syrian custody, subject to IAEA supervision. He also insisted that Syria has the sovereign and legal right to a peaceful civilian nuclear program. Grossi, meanwhile, visited the Deir ez-Zor site that Israel bombed in 2007 in an operation that was known as Operation Orchid. The IAEA has long suspected that a secret nuclear reactor was being built there. Grossi saying excavation and exploration now underway at the site validated the agency's long-standing assessment a nuclear facility was being built there in secret. The IAEA also reportedly found uranium particles at the site during an inspection in 2024. Well, the disclosure comes amid reports that the U.S., Israel, and the IAEA have been discussing the fate of nuclear material left over from the Assad-era program, with Israel closely monitoring one location where the material was allegedly stored. Grossi said Syrian and IAEA experts will work together to safely store and account for the material. Here is Syria's, though, foreign minister.
أن هذه المواد لا تشكل خطرا وأنها ستبقى في العهدة الوطنية السورية وخاضعة لنظام الضمانات الوكالة. كما تؤكد حقها القانوني والسيادي في الاستخدامات المدنية والسلمية للطاقة النووية بما ينسجم مع مصالحها الوطنية والتزاماتها الدولية.
And moving to Gaza, the IDF said it carried out a precision strike near the port of Gaza City, targeting Hamas commanders and operatives from the elite Nukhba force who were meeting to plan attacks against Israeli troops. The targets included a Nukhba company commander, 3 platoon commanders, and several other operatives. The IDF says one of them had participated in the October 7th invasion of Israel. Palestinian reports said the strike hit a cafe, killing 6 people and wounding 14 others. The IDF says it took steps to minimize civilian harm and is still verifying the results. Well, the strike comes as the Trump administration has stepped up efforts to revive a U.S.-backed Gaza ceasefire and disarmament plan. Trump envoy Jared Kushner met recently with Hamas leaders in Egypt before holding a lengthy meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Jerusalem to discuss the future of Gaza. Kushner says progress towards Hamas disarmament could begin within 30 days, including the removal of weapons and the destruction or sealing of terror tunnels. The U.S. is pushing for Hamas to disarm as part of a broader ceasefire and peace roadmap. Well, Kushner emerged from his meeting with Netanyahu seemingly in agreement with Israel's position that Hamas must fully disarm and Gaza demilitarized before any IDF pullback in Gaza, rather than the phased withdrawal plan proposed by the U.S.-backed Board of Peace, which envisioned both processes occurring simultaneously. But a new dispute is emerging between Jerusalem and Washington over Israel's determination to hunt down terrorists responsible for the October 7th massacre. According to anonymous officials cited in Israeli media who were present at the meeting, Netanyahu and Kushner disagreed over Israel's continued strikes against Hamas operatives in Gaza. Kushner reportedly said Washington would not oppose strikes against terrorists posing an imminent threat, but warned Israel against interpreting that exception too broadly. In response, Prime Minister Netanyahu stressed Israel will continue to target terrorists involved in the October 7th attack. Finally, the IDF has now confirmed that the remains of Staff Sergeant Yehuda Katz, an IDF Armored Corps soldier missing since the 1982 Battle of Sultan Yaqub in Lebanon, have been returned to Israel and formally identified this 44 years after he fell in combat. Funeral details have yet to be announced. The IDF released details on the efforts to locate his body in a decades-long intelligence operation led by military intelligence and carried out jointly with the Mossad. Katz was killed on June 11th, 1982, during the First Lebanon War, and had remained officially listed as missing ever since. The remains were identified at the Military Robinets Identification Center, with the IDF Medical Corps and Israel Police present. Katz's family had been kept informed of the search over the years, but his parents, Sarah and Yosef Katz, died before their son could be brought home. His return completes the recovery of all Israeli soldiers who had been missing from the Sultan Yaqub battle. Zachary Baumel's remains were returned in 2019, while Zvi Feldman was brought home last year. IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Yael Zamir said the return of Katz marks a significant moment for the IDF and for Israel. Zamir said that decades may have passed, but Israel's duty to its fallen has not changed, and the IDF will not leave its people behind. The IDF and Mossad say efforts to continue and locate and return any remaining Israelis will continue. Now, before we go on, if you've been dreaming of owning a home in Jerusalem to live in or as an investment, this may be the best time to buy. And Israel Canada has an offer for you right in the beating heart of the holy city. If you want to learn more about it, scan the QR code or just listen to the following message.
Israel Canada is proud to introduce the world to the new heart of the holy city, Midtown Jerusalem. 1,000 luxury apartments, 2 hotels, a shopping boulevard, public buildings, and a spectacular office tower. The mixed-use tower features 14 hotel floors and 26 residential floors. A swimming pool and gym will be located on the roof of an adjacent boutique building. The spectacular 40-story office tower presents office space of 1,350 to 2,200 square meters per floor. The Sharei Zedek building will be fully preserved and transformed into one of the most exclusive hotels in the Middle East, with around 50 suites representing the highest echelon of hospitality. Midtown Jerusalem. Every great city has a Midtown.
If it doesn't work for you, we promise 10 times your money back. This product works in just 1 second to fit perfectly and is suitable for everyone. Simply soak it in hot water to activate the elastic material and have your new dentures.
We promise to refund.
All right, well, it's a busy day packed with security and diplomatic developments. And joining us now to help break all of this down is Ambassador Danny Ayalon, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and deputy foreign minister, now chairman of the Silver Road Capital Group, and Dr. Barak Books, who holds the Patterson Chair in Security and Intelligence and is a lecturer at the Political Studies and School of Communication at Bar-Ilan University. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Ambassador Ayalon, first I want to get your response to this very unusual Israeli strike deep into Syria, actually close to Turkey, and also the U.S. reaction to it, especially Ambassador Tom Barak's very, I would say, harsh words condemning Israel's action there.
Yeah, well, these are two different issues. The Israeli strike, of course, is something which is intended to draw a red line in the sand. We wouldn't want to see Turkey on our northern border, and there is no sense of replacing one enemy like the Shiites in Iran with another one which supports Hamas and very radical Sunni ideology. So I think this is something which is very important to nip it in the bud and not to wait until it grows, out of proportions. As to the American response, I would be very, I would say, careful to say that it's important where it came from. It didn't come from Washington. It wasn't the White House. It wasn't the Secretary of State. It wasn't the Security Council of the United States. It was a local response by the Barak, which was the American ambassador to Turkey, and that is the level. And this is something which almost is like a knee-jerk reaction for him. He has to work with his protagonists here, whether it's Syria, whether it's certainly in Turkey. So for him, it's a useful tool to continue and ingratiate himself so he can have a good working relations with Erdogan and the like. So I wouldn't attach too much importance to that. And as you noticed, Kalev, there was no response from Jerusalem after this Barak's condemnation.
fact, keeping a low profile on this one. Dr. Brooks, I think we have to note in journalistic fairness, Turkey denies that it was doing this planning, this reconstruction work at this Syrian air base. Some skepticism, I think, here in Israel about that claim. But I want to ask you if you talk a little more about what is Turkey's aims in Syria and why Israel would perceive that as a threat. What's their goal here?
First of all, the reconstruction of the Syrian army following the Assad era is being done by Turkey, and they began immediately rebuilding their air force, their armory, and the other branches. Turkey has some parts of northern Syria on which they have influence or some sort of military forces, battling the Kurds that control this area also. They arrived at some agreement with them. Now we see that Turkey has an interest in influencing and rebuilding the new Syrian government and the security echelon. And that being said, as we see the last Israeli, allegedly, Israel did not acknowledge that, attack on Syria, Turkey is a member of NATO, and also the United States has bases in Turkey. So we see the immediate American mediation in order to prevent any escalation or miscalculation between Israel and Turkey.